Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Roberto Corona. I am an Italian anthroposopher and astrologer, and in this video we're going to talk about the next full moon in Capricorn of July 10, a moon that will activate several configurations that we have already talked about, all featuring planet Saturn. I am referring to, for example, the square with Jupiter in Cancer, and in particular to the Grand Minor Trine with Pluto and Uranus. With this moon, we find ourselves completely immersed in the summer season, where the soul of the world begins to descend day by day down towards the earth as the light begins to decrease more and more. We can feel this release of energy that reached its peak with summer solstice, and now we can feel the effect of Cancer, the moon sign, creating that typical summer dizziness, trying to overcome our consciousness. And for this reason, we have the image of Archangel Uriel with his warning gesture, urging us to stay awake, to stay present and conscious to ourselves, not to let our lower nature to lead us astray. Now, this is the chart of the full moon in Capricorn. Let's start, as always, with the latest changes in the sky. On July 4th, we have Venus leaving Taurus and entering Gemini, whereas on July 5th, Neptune goes retrograde, giving an extra oomph to the chart. We have these Neptunian forces reaching a peak around the date of the full moon of July 10 because of this change in direction, with Neptune almost stopping in the sky and creating this oomph, this extra push of Neptunian energy. And we're definitely going to see a Neptune involved in all these configurations due to the presence of Saturn, of course. And last but not least, the most important news of the month is definitely the ingress of Uranus into Gemini, scheduled for July 7. I leave you the link to the video in the description if you want to learn more. Now, this is, of course, the chart of a full moon, and this means that we are reaching this peak of the manifestation process of the etheric forces of the earth, and in particular that process which started with the last new moon in Cancer on June 25. In general, it is, as always, a good moment for reviewing the past, because we have the image of moonlight shed in the darkness of the night. So this is also a good time for waking up, to be more aware because of this process of really being able to see what's going on. And we start also releasing and purify this lunar month, right? Because we have the waning part of the lunar cycle. So the gestation of this new impulses of this new lunar seed begins, and that seed will be sown with the next new moon in Leo on July 24. So moving on to the chart, the full moon is at 18 degrees and 50 minutes of Capricorn up here. As you can see, the moon is found in the starry image of Sagittarius. And the moon is also making a trine aspect with Mars in Virgo. This is Mars, here we go. Now, Mars in turn is closing the opposition between the luminaries in a so-called Thales triangle. So as you can see, we have a sextile between Mars and the Sun and a trine between Mars and the moon. On top of that, being in Capricorn, the moon is, of course, ruled by Saturn, the lord of Capricorn. And Saturn is a very interesting planet in this chart, because not only it is the ruler of the moon, but also Saturn becomes the very center of so many important configurations that can be found here. Of course, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, followed by the square with Jupiter that we have talked about. Here it is. And both Neptune and Saturn are part of a minor Grand Trine with Pluto and Uranus, because this trine between these two planets, which is quite explosive, is closed by the Saturn-Neptune conjunction by these two sextiles aspects. Now, what's interesting is that Uranus can be found at 0 degrees of Gemini, and this means that it is in conjunction with the Pleiades. So I don't know if you can spot here, but basically Uranus is basically on the Pleiades, which are challenging stars of the nature of Mars and the Moon that we're going to take into account. Fortunately, Uranus is also in conjunction with Venus, which will try to loosen with its sweetness the explosive effect of the trine that we mentioned. So let's tackle the meanings of the chart. You know me, I always start from the physical meanings, where basically the zodiac sign of Capricorn introduces us to the general theme of power and control, I would say, confirmed by the trine with between the Moon and Mars in Virgo. So we have this martial flavor in this full moon, right? Now, from the collective point of view, the participation of Saturn, which is the ruler of the Moon, with all three generational planets, activates basically all the issues that we've been talking about in the previous videos. Of course, the conjunction with Neptune and the square with Jupiter is all about the tariffs situation, whereas the minor Grand Trine with Pluto and Uranus is quite the trigger for large protest movements, linked in this specific case in this chart to the symbolism of Mars in Virgo, because of course if we have a struggle of some kind, we need to look at Mars making a trine with the Moon to get an idea of these protest movements that they basically they involved these Mars in Virgo significations. So first of all, we have the rearmament issue of Europe. We have already discussed about it, if you remember. So Mars is connected to weapons, and Virgo is the zodiac sign of industrial production. And please note that during this transit, NATO countries signed an agreement to increase investment in weapons up to 5% of GDP in 10 years. So it is definitely related. On the other hand, in general, this Mars could affect the industrial production in general due to tariffs issues that could lead to a crisis in this sense. And we have already discussed and talked about this tension that we are waiting for July, because we don't have to hide it. The sky for this month is quite intense. Now, the presence of Venus in conjunction with Uranus could also soften these protests, making them more peaceful, I would say, although the impulse brought about by the Pleiades, these stars that are martial in nature, can be quite challenging. And of course, we have the Uranian signification of possible sudden events that could lead, due to these stars, to accidents, if not even explosions. And specifically, the Pleiades bring damage to the eyes and to sight. So keep that in mind. Moving on to the psychological significations, the full moon in Capricorn is basically asking us to let go all the tension, the rigidity, all the stubbornness, especially if it is aimed at power and control. So we don't want to basically let go this control and this power that we might have. So we have also this martial anger coming from the trine of the Moon with Mars, and also because Saturn, ruler of the Moon, is in Aries, again a martial sign. So why do we need to let it go? Because we have Neptune with the aid of Venus, and they are basically connected by a sextile aspect. They are working together, trying to dissolve this rigidity, this stubbornness of Saturn in Aries. And on the other hand, we also have Jupiter in Cancer, which is making a square aspect to Saturn. So Jupiter in Cancer is trying to make us more sensitive, more compassionate, promoting also a kindness of heart. Now, the participation of the collective planets indicates that these practical issues, after all, it is a full moon in Capricorn, very practical. Now, these issues could involve groups in general, groups to which we belong. First of all, of course, our family, and this is confirmed by Jupiter in Cancer, the zodiac sign of family, but also our workplace, any group really, association, and so forth. And this is because the three generational planets, they represent the collective unconscious. So any group that we are basically a part of. In short, the chart from a psychological perspective is asking us to overcome the forces of Saturn in Aries, which, as we have seen, can manifest themselves in an intolerant, harsh, if not even despotic way. Now, from a spiritual perspective, the full moon shines in the very complex starry image of Sagittarius. This constellation in astrosophy is super interesting because it is basically a living description, a living symbol of the spiritual law of evolution. Now, this law describes a progressive emancipation, a progressive detachment of a superior part, let's say a more evolved part, from an inferior part. So how can we understand this concept? We can understand it if we look at the centaur figure, which is in fact a hybrid figure. So we have the human part, which represents the more evolved part of the figure, that is trying to rise up from the animal figure of the horse, which represent the less evolved part of the whole centaur. So on top of that, we have this mythical creature trying to strike with bow and arrow the sun. You have this image of tending towards an even higher part. So overall, this image is an image of evolution, right? So if we look at the position of the moon, we can see that the moon is placed here. So on the animal part of the figure, this is the bow and arrow. The central part is the human figure, but the moon is placed on the animal part of the centaur. Now, this highlights how this evolution process comes with a risk, a danger of some kind. Basically, the more evolved part that relies on the less evolved part could be tempted to exploit and use the lower part, so following an animal impulse instead of relying on it to make the entire system evolve. So basically, this hybrid is supposed to work in a specific way. So in a nutshell, the superior is supposed to lean and rely on what is inferior so that the whole system could benefit from it. But the danger here happens when the more evolved part is basically trying to exploit the inferior part, taking advantage of it, not for the good of the whole system, but just to exploit it somehow, right? So spiritually, the chart shows us exactly what could happen if the shadow part of Saturn in Aries is not overcome. We could end up exploiting others, people less evolved than us, for example, or even exploiting parts of ourselves, parts that are quote unquote inferior, but also more, I would say, innocent in this sense, right? And this risk, this danger, is what is basically tempting us to follow a quite distorted logic that is definitely inspired by the forces of evil. As always, if you want to support my work, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell not to miss out on future astrological insights. I am Roberto Corona. See you in the next video.